Summary of the Amazon S3 service disruption in the Northern Virginia, US-EAST-1 region. A DevOps postmortem. Imagine it's a Tuesday morning in late February, and the internet just decided to take a collective, involuntary nap. For most people, it started as a series of, "Why is this website down?" shrugs, but for the engineers behind the scenes, it was a full-blown, high-stakes nightmare. In the heart of Northern Virginia, a massive piece of infrastructure, one that served as the backbone for countless services and a significant portion of the global web, simply stopped responding. Put operations were failing, data couldn't be retrieved, and even the internal dashboards used to monitor the chaos went dark. It wasn't just a glitch, it was a systemic collapse of a core utility. The scale was staggering, affecting everything from basic websites to critical infrastructure. Something had gone catastrophically wrong in the guts of the system, and for several hours, the tech world was left staring into a void, waiting to see if the lights would ever come back on. So, let me tell you about the time a single typo nearly broke the internet. Back in February 2017, Amazon S3 in the Northern Virginia region went dark, and because so many other services and even their own internal status dashboards depended on it, the fallout was massive. It wasn't some mysterious ghost in the machine. It was a classic case of human error during a routine task. An authorized engineer was trying to debug a billing issue and executed a command with an incorrect parameter. Instead of pruning a handful of servers, the tool wiped out a massive chunk of capacity from two critical subsystems: the index, which handles metadata, and the placement system for news storage. Because the automation lacked sufficient guardrails, it allowed that huge amount of capacity to be stripped away instantly. It took hours to manually restart those systems and get things back online, ultimately teaching us that even with great automation, you always need safety nets to catch a human mistake before it scales into a catastrophe. It was February 28, 2017, and for most of the world, things were running smoothly. Amazon S3 was the bedrock of the internet, a massive, reliable engine powering countless services across the globe. Everything seemed stable until an authorized team member sat down to troubleshoot a routine issue within the S3 billing system. They weren't trying to break anything. They were just trying to perform a standard operational procedure. However, during this routine task, a single command was executed with an incorrect input. Instead of pruning a small handful of servers as intended, the command wiped out a massive chunk of capacity from both the index and placement subsystems. It was a classic oops moment in the most catastrophic sense possible. A simple typo that took a standard maintenance task and turned it into a ticking time bomb for the entire region. It was early morning on February 28, 2017, and the engineers at AWS were performing what they thought was a routine operation. They were debugging an issue with the S3 billing system when a single command, driven by human error and a typed-in mistake, ripped through the infrastructure. Instead of removing a handful of servers, that one typo wiped out a massive chunk of capacity from both the index and placement subsystems. Almost instantly, the alarms started screaming. Put and delete operations began failing at high rates, while GET requests crumbled. But here was the real nightmare. Because so many services relied on S3, even their own internal status dashboard went dark. For hours, the team was flying blind, unable to update customers or see the full scope of the damage. It wasn't until the afternoon that the systems began to slowly crawl back to life, finally restoring normalcy by 2 p.m. after a grueling period of manual recovery and frantic troubleshooting. It started with a single command, a routine operation that went catastrophically wrong. A technician, trying to prune just a few servers from the billing system, entered an incorrect parameter that nuked a massive chunk of both the index and placement subsystems. Almost instantly, the dominoes began to fall. Put and delete operations spiked in failure rates, while GET requests started to crawl and choke. But the real nightmare was the blindfold effect. Because the service health dashboard relied on S3 to function, it went dark, cutting off the engineer's ability to see what was actually happening across other services. It was a classic cascading failure, where a core dependency became a single point of failure for communication. For hours, they were flying blind in a storm of their own making, struggling to restore metadata and storage allocation while the broader internet felt the shockwaves of the collapse. Imagine a single typo in a command line, and suddenly, the internet starts to buckle. In 2017, an authorized S3 team member was just trying to debug a billing issue, but they entered an incorrect parameter into an operational tool. Instead of pruning a handful of servers, that one mistake triggered a massive, unintended purge of capacity from two critical subsystems: the index subsystem, which handles metadata, and the placement subsystem, which manages new storage allocation. Because these systems were gutted so instantly, S3 operations like get and put began failing at alarming rates. This didn't just break S3, it crippled the internal monitoring tools and status dashboards that AWS relied on to communicate during crisis. The core issue wasn't just human error. It was that the automation tool lacked the necessary guardrails to prevent such a massive, rapid loss of capacity from happening all at once. When a core service like S3 goes down in the US-EAST-1 region, it's not just a minor hiccup. It's a tectonic shift that ripples across the entire internet. On February 28, 2017, this wasn't just an internal AWS problem. It was a massive blow to the global infrastructure. For several hours, S3 put and delete operations failed at high rates, while get operations degraded significantly. Because so many other services and even the primary status dashboards relied on S3 for their own data, the blast hit almost everyone. It wasn't just one company losing access to files. It was a massive chunk of the web effectively going dark or limping along. By the time the index and placement subsystems were fully recovered around 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, the sheer scale of the disruption had already proven how dangerous a single point of failure in a foundational service can be. Imagine sitting in a war room while a single typo ripples through the entire infrastructure. It started with an authorized team member trying to debug a billing issue, but a mistyped parameter in an operational tool didn't just prune a few servers. It wiped out massive swaths of capacity from both the index and placement subsystems. Almost instantly, things went dark. Put and delete operations failed, and because so many services relied on S3, even the internal status dashboards went offline, leaving the team flying partially blind for hours. They had to manually initiate a full restart of those crippled subsystems. It was a grueling slog. The index subsystem didn't fully recover until about 2 hours in, and it took nearly 3 hours before the placement subsystem was stable enough to resume normal operations. It was a brutal reminder that when your core infrastructure has deep dependencies, one human error can trigger a massive, cascading failure across the entire web. Fixing a mess this size wasn't about a quick patch. It was about rebuilding the safety nets. The S3 team had to initiate a full restart of both the index and placement subsystems to bring those critical services back online. But they knew that simply restarting wasn't enough to stop the next person from making the same mistake. They went back to the source, the specific operational tool that allowed such a massive chunk of capacity to be wiped out in one go. They re-engineered it to throttle how quickly capacity could be removed and baked in hard safeguards. Now, the system won't let anyone drop infrastructure below a minimum required threshold, no matter what they type into the command line. It was a move from trusting the operator to guarding against the typo, ensuring that one wrong character wouldn't take down half the internet again. This incident serves as a stark reminder that even within highly automated environments, human error can trigger catastrophic outcomes. The primary takeaway here is that automation tools must have robust safeguards. The tool used in this case allowed too much capacity to be stripped away too quickly because it lacked checks against extreme inputs. We also saw how dangerous hidden interdependencies can be. When the internal monitoring dashboards relied on S3, they went dark, severely hampering communication during the crisis. It proves that critical infrastructure, especially for status reporting, should be architected across multiple regions to avoid such cascading failures. Furthermore, the lengthy recovery time highlighted a need for more frequent testing of large-scale failure scenarios. Moving forward, we must prioritize multi-region architectures and audit all operational tools to ensure they have guardrails that prevent a single typo from becoming a global outage. Resilience isn't just about perfect code. It's about building systems that can survive when the inevitable human mistake happens. That's how Amazon Web Services, AWS, turned a very bad day into a lesson. If this saved you an outage, subscribe for the next postmortem.